I'm afraid, what if it fails? What if this? What if that? What if this? Like, what is the worst case scenario? And oftentimes we're already in it.
Welcome. This is Freelancing 101. It's a series dedicated to teaching individuals how to find freelance work on the side or full time. This is episode 2. It's focusing on how to sell leadership, career development, and coaching services with Nichole Harrop. My name is Connor Welch. I'm a digital ad specialist and a full time freelancer. I am so excited to have Nichole Harrop on with me. Nichole essentially helps companies avoid promoting bad bosses. She's the CEO and founder of Grovio. So, your main focus is educating and developing that individual or group before the actual promotion into leadership. Do you also do leadership development with people that are already leaders?
hmm Yeah, great question. So I'm launching a first time leaders cohort as well. Again, something that is a struggle many companies experience and individuals experience is once they actually get promoted, there's still so much opportunity there that I think is missed. And honestly, the reason why I'm doing it is because I have experienced that before. Even as an experienced leader, I have joined companies and have felt a little bit lost. And so,
Mm.
what that program is, all of it is focused on soft skill development, helping you to know what questions to ask to get the help that you need, to get the support as well. So, it's all about really providing them the tools so that they can have that ongoing versus I'm not very prescriptive of saying, go do X, Y, and Z, and you'll just be successful in your career. It's very much, hey, what is your culture like? What is this like? Do you have access to your manager? Is it something that you don't have as much access to? And how can we help you to be self sustainable? As you're growing and morphing and adjusting into this from a team leader or sorry, team member position into a people manager role.
Let's dive in. This is kind of more of a interview style where I've crafted a couple questions. They're
Mhm.
really just categorized as like what you do and maybe specifically how it relates to freelancing. I think freelancing really is anything outside of a single source income from one corporation. So
Yeah.
this is like absolutely what you're doing. But I'd also argue, a lot of individuals that are at a corporation right now and have a good W-2 income could learn a lot from this conversation because they could develop some of their skills and create some courses somewhat similar to what you're doing and find work on the side. And so I'm
Yeah.
really excited. But before we dive in, I like to just ask one question. And this, if you could give one piece of advice to somebody that's starting as a freelancer, what would that be?
Such a good question. I think it's figuring out what drives and motivates you because just because you're good at something doesn't mean that you are like that you're passionate about it, right? And we see that a lot in the workplace that people are really good at certain things and so they get more of that work added onto their plate in the workplace and then they're thinking, wow, just because I'm good at it doesn't mean I actually enjoy it. So I think what I would give as advice is what really drives and motivates you. For
Oh,
me, that is the impact. I'm very impact driven, and the whole reason why I even started doing this work, freelance work, is because I wanted to make a bigger impact with the coaching and really focus on the coaching and the leadership and professional development side versus worrying about, customer satisfaction and, are people answering calls in appropriate times and who
mm,
is late to work and what like progress improvement plans am I going to have to put people on. That was like a really tough thing for me to manage and balance because I was so passionate about developing individuals and felt like I didn't have enough time to do that. So that's really where my passion stemmed from, and I started envisioning what could that look like for me? How could I, step out into this and do something a little bit different? And that's kind of what got me to where I am today.
oh, I love it. the drive and motivation, finding that before you begin is so important because, at least in my experience, freelancing can be really difficult, especially at the beginning, where
Mhm.
it can take months and months for you to really find valuable work and to refine what you do. And so I would argue if money is the sole driver and you're not seeing that money come in immediately, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. So I love that piece of advice. It's so good. The rest of the podcast is going to be broken out into what you do, why you do it, and we're going to then end on how you do it. And we're going to kind of, if you don't mind, maybe do more of a generic how to, because I think there's just so many opportunities for coaching, development,
Mhm.
leadership development, career development, that I think a lot of people with their experience with where they're at could actually start, not easily, but they would be able to apply their skills with some refinement
Mhm.
and start finding at least a side hustle or a side income with that. So
Yeah.
I'll start with the what. So what
Mhm.
skills did you need or are finding that you need, both maybe hard and soft skills? Yeah, go
I
ahead.
would say skills, yeah, hard and soft. I mean, for me, I don't have as much imposter syndrome around the type of work that I do in the sense that I've led and managed teams for over 12 years now. So I've like lived, I eat, sleep, and breathe leadership development. Like instead of a Spotify wrapped, like mine's like the Audible wrapped. Like I'm constantly binging leadership development books and all of those things. So that was like all of the soft skills that I built over those years is, managing people and how could I then teach that as well? Because just because you get to a certain point also doesn't mean that you're going to be the best teacher of that thing as well. So something to
Mhm.
take into consideration when you're thinking of, could I go out and, do this on my own or in addition to what I do, can I teach it in a way that people receive it really well? So part of that and hard skills, I'll probably jump a little all over the place with that, is when I was growing in my career, I took on different, training roles as work that I did in addition to my role within the organization. I did a lot of interview prep because in customer support roles, there's constant turnover. So a part-time role within my full-time role was always interviewing and hiring and training individuals. So there was a lot of that understanding of kind of what it takes to grow as a leader as well. Trying to think what else. Hard skills. I would say once I started moving into, what does it look like if I started building this on my own? I built my own website from scratch, so I had to learn how to do that. It was a lot of
Mhm.
YouTube videos. Same with my podcast. That was really difficult as well. I knew I had the passion to do it, but the execution side, really bootstrapping things without having money to be throwing into having help with anything. So it took me a little bit longer. I've grown a lot slower because I have done everything pretty much by myself. And so I learned how to set up a podcast and where to get it to go to all of these different places and
Mhm.
where do I record and how do I edit, and all of those things have taken time for me to learn. So a lot of hard skills there. And same with when I started recording my content for my program. I learned some of that from another job that I still work really part time at, is how to set up a really nice like space for your video content, where you should position yourself in your frame of your video,
Mhm.
how you're going to talk to people so that it feels really connective, that kind of a thing. And 4 years of podcasting has definitely given me a lot of that practice as well. And learning systems and uploading videos to a program that I pay for to have access to that. So, lots of different things I've had to learn along the way. The nice
Mhm.
thing was a lot of that was, okay, I'm confident in this area of what I teach and why I teach it. And then the other part is figuring out, okay, now I just need to figure out how to do the software and all the different things to actually get it out into the world, and still very much learning how to sell myself. Like you mentioned, I think that's one of the hardest things for me, is, and what I've hesitated on for so long really, is showing up in the DMs, because there's so much hate on that on LinkedIn, that I've
Yeah.
really like thought, okay, if I just show up on LinkedIn in the feed, I'm going to grow. And that hasn't necessarily been the case. And so I'm pivoting and changing and adjusting
Mhm.
course every single day as I'm trying to figure those things out along the way.
I love it. I think this podcast is going to do two things. I hope it will educate individuals that are interested in freelancing, but it's also somewhat therapeutic for me to talk with another freelancer because the amount of struggle, I mean, same thing with the website, learning how to market myself, it's a part of the journey. And going back to like what drives and motivates you, that's why it's so incredibly important, because you'll quickly find, especially at the beginning when you are bootstrapped and you just
Mhm.
can't really afford to hire an expert to do that for you, that you've got to figure out a lot of other skills. Nobody else is going to do it for you, and so you've got to do that. So I'll jump over to the why question, and this one I think is really powerful, and you kind of mentioned it, but why do you do freelance slash, I would just say, run your own business?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. We kind of touched on that in terms of like that impact driven. When I think the biggest pain point I experienced is when I was trying to get promoted into my first leadership role. I worked for a very well established company, and they had some leadership development programs, but they were more so for once you got promoted to the first tier of leadership as a team leader, then you could get potentially access to this other program. But there
Mhm.
wasn't anything provided for the very entry level, or like bottom of the barrel, that we love to call the customer support teams, that I've always loved. Those were my people.
Mhm.
Is the bottom of the barrel. So I was trying to do so much of that when I worked as a, well, I tried to learn as much as I could when I was in those entry level roles, and trying to figure it out. I didn't know what LinkedIn was. I think I created a LinkedIn profile like while I worked there, but I had no clue what it could do for me or how I could help. I was told, hey, you should sign up for this professional networking site. And I think I created a profile and probably didn't log in again for years.
Mm.
And there weren't really a ton of internal mentors. There wasn't a lot of that, like, talked about. Mentors weren't really a thing. Like, I don't even think I understood the term of a mentor even when I was, early 20s. And
Mm.
so I was trying to figure things out on my own. And finally, after several turn downs and dealing with a lot of stuff, we'll say, I ended up finally getting promoted. And
Mm.
then it was still a little bit of an uphill battle, because then I got feedback that, oh, she was only promoted because she's pretty. Or I had team members internally who like really loved their old leader. And I think that that's amazing. And they really were not very nice when I was trying to start leading them and figure out how to start gaining a relationship with these people, and had to fire several people within my first few weeks on the job. And so all of that was a struggle. And I thought, as the years went on, how can I help more people avoid this struggle? And from that very early on of, I struggled, and always had ups and downs. I joke that my husband, he's a um, commercial electrician, and his career path has just been this smooth sailing, upward
Mhm.
trajectory, raises, growth. Now he's a master electrician and all these things and doing so great. And my career path is just this up and down, crazy Richter scale. And I take all the struggle and put it into the passion of why I do what I do, to help more people grow without so much of the hardship that I experienced.
I'm sure glad you were able to turn that really bad situation into something really good and help prevent that from happening in the future. So
Yeah.
that's a really good why, Nicole. My goodness.
Thanks.
Talk about a really high standard for the first guest. The next guests are going to struggle for sure. So,
No.
we'll just dive into the how because I think this is probably the most important. I
Mhm.
think a lot of people out there have kind of what you had, these decades of experience doing something that they were really really good at, and then
Mhm.
they either got to a point where they are being held back by their career, it's just not progressing quick enough, they are unfortunately laid off or are not making ends meet with just the economy and where things are at. So I
Mhm.
really wanted to focus in on teaching individuals exactly like how they could make this work and avoiding, kind of going back to what you were talking about, avoiding any unnecessary trauma or struggle that maybe you or I have already experienced and we can help them avoid.
Yeah.
So that's just the next portion. But the first question is, how did you craft your skills?
So mine was a lot of, again, like learning on the job. And I think a lot of people who might think of, oh, could I do this as some additional work? Because I love working. My husband thinks I'm nuts. I'm like, I love doing all this work. I love doing all the different things. Sometimes I'll have like three jobs at a time doing different
Mhm.
things because I love the connection that it brings and the income that it can bring as well. And
Mhm.
just different experiences I think are so fun. I've done a lot of different interesting jobs and it's just a lot of fun for me. So through that, I've developed different skills and that helps me to see different perspective. And so for me specifically, skills that I started developing is doing things that I already was naturally doing. So, for
Mhm.
example, when I got recruited to this startup company, which was such a cool experience because that first promotion and the struggle and different things, that manager was actually told not to hire me. He was told to hire a guy that had 8 years of additional experience. So he had 10 years total experience. I had 2 years. And that manager chose me and again said the whole like, I hope this lights your fire in a good way
Mhm.
because I believe in you and I know you're going to do great things. So let's prove them wrong. And so, right from the get go, I knew I had to really prove myself. Um, but what I started doing in that job I got recruited over to was I was having a conversation with another coworker, and I told him I was like, "Hey, have you ever thought of moving into a team leader role? I see a lot of potential in you." And for him, he was like, "I have never thought about that. I feel like I don't have the skills, or I don't think I'm doing that." And so it was me believing in him and several months later of like starting to move into that, he came back and, thanked me so sincerely to say, "Hey, I never would have pictured myself in this role had you not brought it up and told me that you believed in me and saw that potential." And so it was just little things like that throughout the years of I've always said, I want to develop my people. And if that helps them to stay longer, great. If that helps them to grow onto other departments internally, or grow to other companies for better opportunities, I would feel successful doing that. I would not see that as a loss. And so by doing that, I was kind of naturally coaching all the time. And that's kind of what started developing. So then I thought, what could I do for a program? And I wrote out all the things I wish I would have had earlier on. So for anyone in, maybe your graphic design or maybe your, any sort of like data, like what are things you wish you would have known earlier how to do? And can you teach those things? So I wrote all of these things down and I actually was talking to another mentor and explaining it all. And he was like, "Oh, that sounds like soft skill development." And I hadn't even like connected those dots. So like it was me talking to other people and other mentors and helping me to shape what this is. So really it's just that lived experience and
Mhm.
how could I start to take some of those things that I knew and was good at and put that into a program or build something for a freelance.
I love it. So let's say somebody has somewhat of a similar experience where they have at least a decade or so of um, leadership development, career development, just essentially through their career have found many ways to develop their peers through
Mhm.
education and lessons. Uh, what additional resources out of just experience, if any,
Mhm, mhm.
are out there that could possibly help that individual refine some of those skills to then essentially help them find their first client and make an impact with that first client, that first coaching one on one, that first course they build? Do you know, or
Mhm.
individuals to connect with, resources or other individuals they should connect with?
Yeah, I think a big thing if you have an idea of wanting to go into freelancing, it's starting to build your network. You might have a little bit of an
Hmm.
internal network with the people that you're currently working with, but if you're not building an external network, that's where I would say to start first. If I could go back and if I would have known what LinkedIn was back then and how it could help me, I for sure would have started connecting with people more intentionally about who I could help, who could I learn from. So, definitely networking, mentors for sure. Who has done what you want to do, and how can
Hmm.
you learn from them? Take a course from them. I would, if people take a course from me to learn how they could do it on their own, by all means, like that's like that abundance mindset. I Other people are going to learn from you differently than they're going to learn from me, and if you come and see how I structure things, great. Like amazing. You'll still learn a lot even if you aren't there for the intention of growing in your career. Um, so yeah, I would say the mentorship piece of finding someone who's been there, networking and starting to get your voice out there, and again, getting specific on how you want to be helping people, I think is a big thing. Because
Hmm.
again, for the longest time, I've been doing this more specifically for only this year. I started really starting to network and put myself out there as of February, and
Hmm.
so I'm still learning so much and growing so much and being like, wow, I wish I would have known this earlier this year. So it's always being willing to learn and grow. And in the leadership development space, there's so many free resources like podcasts, like, I mean, Audible is, a
Hmm.
subscription, but like I'll go and listen to Audible books and get some additional insight and information that helps me to continue saying, do I resonate with this, or how do I differ and why? And again, honing that in as I go.
Oh, I love it. Nichole, I feel like you've absolutely made a splash, at least in my opinion. I mean, I didn't know you just started essentially in February of this year.
Mhm, mhm.
First of all, congrats. I feel like you're everywhere. I've seen you in person at events all the time. You
Mhm.
and I kind of do that LinkedIn luncheon, so that may help.
Yes.
But
Yes.
yeah, but on LinkedIn specifically, this actually leads into the question really well is
Sure.
how do you then market yourself? I think
Mhm,
absolutely building that support group, that network, finding resources, but uh, in addition to maybe just connecting with people on
mhm.
probably LinkedIn, but just social media, how did you find clients?
Yeah. Some of my first clients were actually from the mentor who helped me recognize that I offer soft skill development,
Mm,
because of people who already know, like, and trust me. We're able to say, I know this is new for you and you're going to be growing, but I'm going to put some people through your program. And that was a really big learning opportunity for me to really start to put people through the reality of what has been in my head, and see what works, see what was not as clear maybe. Recognizing I'm always going to be making changes and improvements, so I appreciate feedback. And for some people, they were saying, maybe this wasn't as helpful for the stage that I'm at in my career, and it really
mhm,
helped me hone in that yes, it's for people who are growing into, who are kind of on that waiting list of sorts, where you think, oh, if we had a position opening up to grow, to promote someone, that person should go through my program. um,
mhm,
of course, I've had leaders go through it as well who've been in leadership roles for years and still are learning things or confirming things, recognizing how they can better lead their own people. So it just depends on how they've joined it, but that was how I first got some of my clients. uh, through that same mentor, I had a company hire me sight unseen, essentially. They just paid me and put a couple people through my program. And it was really helpful for me to hear feedback from that company to say, because soft skill development isn't something that you can see overnight, right? You know, when you try
Hmm.
to change something, soft skills, it can be very subtle, so powerful and impactful over time. But it was really cool that in the 8 weeks that I worked with each of his team members, he said that he noticed a difference in their confidence, in their questions that they were asking in team meetings and stuff like that. So I thought that was very reassuring for me so that he knew, you know, his money was going to a good place.
I
Um,
love
but yeah, outside of that, I do show up on LinkedIn a ton. I'm networking a lot. I still, like I said, I struggle to start to really mention like how I could help a company or make that difference. So I'm working on being more bold. Again, from other great people I've met on LinkedIn who challenge me to be a little bit more bold. And so now I'm showing up a little bit more in the DMs to start conversations. I am so good at connecting with people in person, and I pride myself on my ability to build relationships. But
it.
again,
Hmm.
LinkedIn is an interesting place that I feel like people have their guard up and their walls up, and they're like, oh, are you just going to try to sell me something? And sure, I
Hmm.
have something that I would love to sell them, but it's always going to come from a place of if this is going to be beneficial for your team, great, let's try it out. But if not, I still want to offer value to people who are leading other people and how I can, you know, provide some guidance whether or not they ever work with me.
Oh, absolutely. And connecting and messaging. A lot of for me, the messaging on the behind the scenes is where it really is important. How about in marketing or in person marketing,
Mhm.
like at events, taking people out to lunch? How has that helped or has it?
Yeah, yeah. So again, bootstrapping, I've been very grateful to go to certain different events. And to be honest, I will sign up as a volunteer if I have
Same.
to get myself into
Yep.
events. Because again, I don't have a lot of the extra cash flow to be putting into going out to these events. So if you see me at an event and I'm wearing an event t-shirt, you know, that's the whole reason why I got there was because I
Hmm.
offered to volunteer some of my time to then get a free ticket into the event. So I have
Yep.
done that for several events this year and have really built great friendships and connections that I know will pay off over time. So I'm in it for the long game. I could probably do a little bit better about sharing what I do and how I can help people a little bit more clearly when I am connecting. But again, I'm always connection and relationship first and know that that will lead to greater things down the line. So I recognize I grow a little bit slower by default for that reason. And yeah, like the lunch and learns that we do, again, building more relationships over time has been really helpful. Meeting, I now do like a mastermind with a girlfriend who she DM'd me right at the beginning of the year, or maybe it was late last year. And we started to become friends within the last several months, really building a great relationship and helping hold each other accountable for what our goals are and how we can keep supporting each other in our different ventures.
I love it. Very similar on my end. It's more of guerrilla warfare
Yeah.
marketing where you
Mhm.
just show up wherever you possibly can, at least
Yeah.
for sure initially. And I found that more likely than not, the individual that I'm talking with at those in person events probably doesn't need my service, but the people that tend to show up are so well connected that the referral from that for me has been incredibly beneficial. It's almost and I'm the same way. I'd rather nurture a quality connection with somebody because I think everybody knows somebody that could use your service. You just need to kind of be there, I
Yeah.
guess. But yeah, okay, I got two more questions.
Sure.
So let's say you've marketed yourself efficiently, you've crafted your resource or your skills, and you're confident. How do you know how much to charge for your services?
Yep, I think that's
That's a
the
hard
big
question.
yeah, it really is, and
Yeah.
so for me, I've joined lots of different coaching programs over the years to kind of see what do they charge, what kind of value am I getting out of it, and I've always told myself no matter what I'm investing, I will make sure that I show up in a way that helps me to get value, because I've joined programs that ended up not being exactly, they sold maybe a certain goal or outcome, and then you join and you're like, "Oh, this like really wasn't very well put together, and
Mm-hmm.
why did I do this?" And sometimes I like shame myself. What the heck were you thinking? But then I go back
Mm.
to my principle of like, I'm always going to make sure I learn something. Maybe I'm learning what not to do. Maybe I'm learning ways that aren't helpful. And so I kind of figure out what was my path to get here and how can I help other people avoid it so that they don't join my program and think, why did I pay for this? So, I know I offer a lot of value throughout my program, and there are other courses that charge much higher. So, other things I did was I looked at other self paced courses online as well as group coaching. I feel like I'm definitely unique in the sense of offering that group coaching option
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of what you see out there is very much self paced, which I think is still good. But I really like the idea of having that group coaching to get that live feedback. So, looking at kind of the different platforms that offer leadership development, seeing what they're charging, and adjusting my prices for now as I'm growing, right? I'm still
Mm-hmm.
gaining brand awareness, and for people to really see me and my company Grovio as like the name for, if you have entry level people you want to develop, I want people to think of Grovio. So as I'm growing that, sure, I think my prices will change with demand. But right now, I've priced myself at what I think is valuable enough and a little bit of maybe a pain point for someone to invest, to say, "Ooh, if I'm paying for this myself, this is probably one of the biggest investments someone at an entry level will make." But
Mm-hmm.
the value that they get out of it, and can, if they can get promoted into a leadership role faster, they will absolutely make that money back very quickly.
Oh, I love it. I think for your situation, though, even doing your market research, what you offer is rather unique, where it is that entry level pre promotion. So I'm sure you've
Mhm.
just kind of had to learn as you go,
Yeah.
as far as how much you charge, right? Like, and same here.
Mhm.
It's definitely a learning process. Okay, last question. Then I just have a final
Sure.
question that I'm going to ask everybody. But how do you start? And I know that's such a generic term, but I think a lot of people don't know like when, where, and how to start
Mm,
freelancing.
yeah. And to go back real quick, Connor, one small piece of advice that that I would give on pricing is I always say, like, currently at this. So if you're like messaging people
Ooh.
and you have like entry level pricing, I did that a lot with coaching uh, one on ones. And I would say, "Hey, here's my price." And then months later, when they're like, "Oh, wow, I realized she's, got a podcast, she does this program, like,
Mm-hmm.
she could be really helpful." And then they come back to me and they're like, "Hey, can I get it at this price?" And it's like that weird, awkward, like, well, I told him that's what I charge, but now I charge more because I'm getting more of
Mm-hmm.
those clients. So now I say it's currently at this amount because that might change, right? And I think that for me, as someone who struggles with pricing and, like that's just like an awkward conversation sometimes. For me, it's
Yeah.
like it's been a little bit easier to segue to say it's currently at. So if I'm emailing or messaging someone on LinkedIn and I say that and they want to hire me 6 months later when my prices have gone up, I can say, "Okay,
Mm-hmm.
my prices are currently this." Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so they can connect the dots that, oh, her prices have changed. So that was my quick advice there. How to start? Gosh, yeah, this was my biggest struggle. I'm sure you probably relate, and everyone
Good luck.
on
Yeah.
here probably relates. Grovio has been something in the works for years,
Mm-hmm.
at least 2 years on top of this year, that I have been thinking about what could this look like. I had all these videos recorded and kind of scrapped those because it wasn't what I wanted to go in a direction. So it's been brewing for a while. And maybe many people tuning in feel the same way. They're like, I just haven't taken that leap. And for me, it honestly took getting laid off from a really well paying
Mm-hmm.
job. I was actually podcast coaching at the time, which
Mm-hmm.
felt kind of like a dream job. It's so fun coaching podcasters. And I loved doing it. It was very intense work because I managed so many podcasts. But when I got laid off from that job, I thought, you know what? Like, we've got some extra money, padded in our bank account. So I talked to my
Mm-hmm.
husband and said, like, are you cool with this? We have two young kids. And he
Yeah.
was like, yeah, like, let's do it, And that was really scary for me. It's still scary for me. And I have let go of the idea that like I have to be successful right from the get-go. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think if I were to do things a little differently, uh, for me, I had to go through the path I did. Like I had to be forced into it. But if I were, if you're different than me, and you don't feel like you have to be forced to start, because I was really nervous to get myself out there and to be judged and to be told like that my program isn't worth it, which I've had people tell me that I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, and that's been hard. But I know that I have something to offer that's great, and so that's what keeps me going. And you're always gonna have haters, which is okay. But
Yeah.
if I were to do it slightly differently, I would say starting, if you can, if you have the resources, to start getting some clients, slow going for like while you're still working in your corporate job or whatever else that it is that you're doing, so you can kind of start building up from there, getting some of those testimonials, getting some, can you do some free work while you still have a full time job so that you can get some of those testimonials and hit the ground running a little bit faster if or when you do quit your full time job. That's what I would say in that regard. But every single time, I think now knowing where I'm at now, 11 months later, there's so many things I wish I would have done sooner. And so it's like, but you're never going to have that certainty
Mm-hmm.
without taking action. And so anytime that I'm sitting, and even just before our podcast, I was just like, I have so many things that I want to do, and like what's going to be most helpful, and just really in that indecision, like crippling, right? That we can get in this
Mm-hmm.
like decision fatigue of what should I do? And I remind myself, what action can I take that could help get me a client, like which means DMing people on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
What action could help me, build, continue to build my program, and that's maybe asking for more testimonials, things like that. I try to break mine down into sections of what's going to help me in the future. So planning out, future programs, what's going to help me in the immediate, and that's the networking and the messaging, and what's going to help me continue to learn and grow, and that's through also finding mentors and continuing to pour into myself so that I stay on top of my craft.
No, I love it. Also, Nicole, once you get haters, that means you're making waves. So congrats, you're crushing it. I remember when I got the first hate comment on LinkedIn, I like wanted to screenshot it and paste it on the wall. I was like, oh, people are noticing me. Let's
Yeah,
go. So
exactly.
if you had to restart, what would you do? And I want to ask this because I think we get this mindset that it's like, oh, well, I don't dare try because what if I fail? And I've just
Mhm.
learned over, I've done full time freelance for about a year and side hustle for multiple years before that. But I think I had to convince myself it's like, okay, the worst case scenario, if I had to restart, maybe I just go back to a full time job for a little bit and then
Yeah.
pivot type of thing.
Mhm.
So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I listened to a podcast, and I it was so profound when the host was saying, what is the worst case scenario for you? Because
Mm-hmm.
people are so scared to take next steps because of exactly what you're saying, Connor. I'm afraid, what if it fails? What if this? What if that? What if this? Like, what is the worst case scenario? And oftentimes we're already in it. We're like, well, I guess worst case scenario, I if I don't succeed, I'll go back and work a job like this one, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's a little bit more scary because it seems like trying to find work today is a little bit more challenging than in years prior. So
For
I
sure.
get that. All valid things. So I think if I were to go back and do things differently, I am still very much like a recovering perfectionist. So I felt like I had to have the Future Leaders program, like it was recorded, edited, buttoned up, the workbook like was
Mhm.
created before I ever even talked about it. And so, people talking about like I sold people into these programs and it wasn't even created yet. That was like my worst nightmare. But now I'm learning and growing and realizing, okay, it's okay to start building something up, start gaining people's interest and saying, hey, like, what would you want to learn about? If I were to offer a program like this, what would you want to learn about? And then get that feedback, keep that information from those people, outline something. If it makes sense and might resonate with that person, then you follow up and say, hey, I'm building this program or whatever it is that you're doing. And I think you might be interested because you said that this would be helpful for you. Would you be
Mhm.
interested in joining? My first couple of, groups might be a much lesser rate if you're willing to give me some feedback kind of thing. So I think that's what I would have done differently. And what I'm doing also for that first time leaders program that I've just made like one post about. And again,
Mhm.
probably my second piece of advice is like, you have to talk about it until you feel like you're so annoying to yourself, because there's so many people who I talk to who I am very close with that are like, "Oh, I didn't know that you offered that." And I'm like, "Wow, that's my bad for not more clearly communicating what I offer." So that first time leaders program, I'm not building it until I start selling people into it, because maybe
Mhm.
people won't register for the January cohort that's going on. And then if I spend so much time now creating it for something that doesn't sell anyone into it at first, that's pointless. So those
Mhm.
are the kinds of things that I'm still very much learning and growing along the way.
I love that. So, kind of going back to how to start, you're saying if you had to restart, you would prepare a little bit less before starting. You would go for it. And I think
Mhm.
that actually applies to everyone. It's like test out the waters. Go tell people that
Yeah.
you are doing this. Like the imposter syndrome will always be strong, but test out the waters and just try and go for it now, you know?
Be okay with being clear about what you're doing. I think the biggest thing,
Yes.
you don't want to
Yes.
bait and switch. I've never been that person. And I've seen coaches give advice about that, like the fake it until you make it. And I'm not really like that. You'll see if
Hmm.
you follow my posts, like I'm very vulnerable and I share things that like I struggle with or I've struggled through, because I want people to see like I'm a normal person just like you, showing up and trying to help. But build it authentically to say, hey, I want to build this. I know I can help because I have all this experience, and I want
Hmm.
to make something that's going to help you and would love your feedback. So that's like that first step. And that is a huge thing that I think is really cool, because guess what happens when you get to put feedback into something and then you go through it, you're more bought in. You have more skin in the game to be like, wow, Connor built this for me. And I can see
Hmm.
where he's helping because he took my advice of what I needed and he built something to provide a solution to that need or pain
Oh,
point or whatever that is.
absolutely. Going back to just being crystal clear with where you're at, I think for me, especially initially, I would pitch, hey, I've got this many years experience. I am
Mhm.
new to full-time freelance, but I will work harder than anyone and I will do whatever it takes to make this work. I
Yeah.
didn't push this idea that, hey, I'm 100% expert. I know all these tricks and tips.
Hmm.
No, I'm going to be there and I'm going to communicate with you consistently, constantly, and I'm going to work harder. And I
Yeah.
was super honest. So absolutely. You can start without being an expert. I think you have to, right?
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
absolutely. Well, Nicole, it was such a pleasure.
Yeah.
How can listeners get a hold of you?
Honestly, I think the best place, especially for people looking into freelance, is to connect over on LinkedIn. So I'm sure you'll put
Okay.
my LinkedIn
Yep.
handle in the comments. But yeah, come find me on LinkedIn. It's Nichole. My last name is Harrop. I'm sure if you search that, you'll find me. But yeah, I'd love to connect. Anyone who's doing freelance work and new and learning and just wants to connect, mention that you heard the podcast, and that will be a quick way for us to become best friends. And I love
Yeah.
talking ideas and seeing how I might be able to help you, even though we might have very different niches.
Yeah. And I also just want to mention your website for Grovio is www.hellogrovio.com. Is that
That's
correct?
correct. Hmm.
Thank you for joining. This has been episode 2 with Nichole Harrop. She has provided so much value, and I hope you as a listener have found some tangible help that can guide you on your journey to freelance.